High in the mountains of Catatumbo in northeast Colombia, the coca leaf is a lifeline for many families in the region. Juan says it's the only crop that provides a steady income.
We've been told so many times that we could get benefits if we change crops, but nothing has arrived for most of us here. That's why we continue to do this. There's lots of empty promises.
Dozens of people are working here, among them a 14-year-old teenager called Gabriel. The coca leaf is the main ingredient for cocaine, and there's at least 50,000 hectares of it in Catatumbo. UN data says that these plants are growing in record numbers across the country. Not far away, the leaves are chopped into pieces, and then they add sulfate, cement and diesel. The paste produced is later on taken to a more sophisticated lab. Pedro, not his real name, says he gets around $650 for a kilo of cocaine paste, but he's only left with $140.
Do you think we are the drug traffickers? Don't you think we should get help to do something else instead of being killed? If they don't want us to grow the coca, then seriously help us to grow something else.
This is the first step in the process of cocaine production, and it's mostly carried out by peasants in the countryside. When President Gustavo Petro came to office, he decided to take a less militarized approach in coca eradication and decided to promote social development in areas such as this one. But his agenda is facing steep obstacles, including pressure from the United States.
Colombia has been a crucial U.S. ally in the region in the fight against drug trafficking, but President Petro has increasingly questioned the U.S. military presence in the Caribbean and close to Venezuela. The United States has accused him of not doing enough to fight against drugs and has threatened to withdraw assistance. Colonel Jesus Alfonso Rojas says Colombia continues to fight drug traffickers in record numbers and that they need U.S. help.
We need the technology and capacities which we don't have, supporting our helicopters, special equipment, and everything else we use to fight traffickers. It is a concern.
Drug trafficking has been fueling Colombia's conflict for decades. The United States has spent billions in a fight that most analysts agree has so far failed. Petro is trying a different approach. But for now, much of his programs have failed to reach those who want to start anew. Teresa, Al Jazeera, Catatumbo, Colombia.
Tensions have been growing between the US and Colombia, one of Washington's closest Latin American allies. The US says Colombia has failed to stop drug trafficking. The Pentagon has been carrying out attacks on boats in the Caribbean, claiming they were carrying drugs to the US. Last month, Colombian President Gustavo Petro accused the U.S. of murder after one of the strikes reportedly killed a fisherman in its territorial waters. In response, President Donald Trump called Petro an illegal drug dealer. Trump has threatened to suspend aid to Colombia. The U.S. provided more than $700 million to the country in 2023. Michael Shifter is Adjunct Professor of Latin American Studies at Georgetown University. He joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Michael, thanks so much for being with us here on Al Jazeera. Let me ask you first, Colombian President Petro vowed to move Colombia away from decades of U.S.-backed eradication efforts that failed. Petro wants a new approach, but pressure from Washington is mounting. From your perspective, could Trump's policies and this military buildup have any kind of positive effect?
Well, the only positive effect that the buildup has is to focus attention on the drug issue, which I think has been neglected. But clearly what the Trump administration is doing, I mean, blowing up small boats that allegedly are carrying drugs against international law and with no possibility of being effective, obviously is not the answer. Only makes matters worse and deepens tensions with the Colombian government as well as other governments in Latin America who are very critical of what's going on. So if there were a more constructive approach and a serious willingness to commit resources to tackle this problem, then one could see some potential benefits. But what we're seeing now is extremely frustrating, and I think there's a little reason to be optimistic that this is going to make any dent in this spreading problem throughout the region and throughout the world.
Yeah, Michael, you're talking about deepening tensions. I mean, President Petro accused the U.S. of murder after one of those strikes reportedly killed a fisherman. Trump called Petro an illegal drug leader, dealer rather. This kind of rhetoric being thrown around, what does that mean for the future of U.S.-Colombian relationships?
Well, there's been a very high level of tension and hostility between Trump and Petro, which is not surprising. Both of them are very conflictive and very confrontational in their leadership styles. There's absolutely no basis for what President Trump said about President Petro, about being involved in the drug trade. It's clear that he's presided over record coca cultivation, as was shown in your setup speech. That's true, and that his policies have been ineffective. But that's not the same as being involved in the drug trade himself, and there's no evidence of that. And it's extremely reckless, irresponsible for President Trump to say that. And I think President Petro perhaps was unwise to use very aggressive rhetoric with President Trump, given the asymmetry in power. But of course, many experts have said that what we're seeing is extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean and now in the Pacific with these bombings of supposedly drug boats. There's no due process. There's no evidence. There's no transparency. We have very little information. So I think there are grounds to be very critical, but one has to sort of, I think, temper one's words, because the United States is an important ally of Colombia, and Colombia needs the United States in a variety of issues, including trying to reduce drug trafficking in the country.
Michael, we know that drug trafficking has been fueling Colombia's conflict for decades. President Petro has been trying a different approach. Why are those programs failing to reach those who want a fresh start?
Well, I think, first of all, for those programs to be successful, you need huge resources. And I don't think Colombia has the resources, have been willing to use the resources. If you're going to create alternative sources of development, alternative development, which has been around forever. This is not exactly an original idea. This has been, in the last couple of decades, I've heard this many, many times. But in order to make it work, you really need a lot of resources to give incentives and credit for alternative crops. It's very hard to compete with coca because it's obviously very lucrative. And so in order to make that change, you really have to commit resources. And the Petro government has not been very effective in any of its public policies. You need a state that's capable, and you need a state that's prepared to commit resources. And I think neither of those really are met in the case of Colombia under President Petro. And
Michael, we mentioned this before, but the U.S. has been fighting this so-called war on drugs to eradicate these drugs for decades. Why have these efforts failed?
First of all, I think everybody knows they've failed. I mean, if anybody who is serious and is honest, it's hard to deny that they've utterly failed. I think it's been misguided. I think that the problem, first of all, has not been to sufficiently tackle demand for these drugs. The programs have been very inadequate in the United States and Latin America and Europe as well. So that, I think, has been one problem. I think the other problem is I think they've been focused more on trying to take down cartel leaders or trying to make some really visible sort of action against drug trafficking without really doing the very, very hard police intelligence work that is required. These are huge transnational businesses. And I think that requires a very different approach than we saw with, Pablo Escobar in the early 1990s. The drug trade has evolved significantly. And I don't think the approaches from Washington and elsewhere have kept up with these fundamental changes. They're moving very rapidly, and the drug traffickers and those who are involved in the drug trade, this is a huge business, and you have to focus on that business and trying to address that business rather than showing off killing some drug leader or extraditing some cartel leader to the United States. That's not going to do it. That's not going to really solve the problem.
All right, Michael Shifter, who's adjunct professor of Latin American Studies at Georgetown University. Thanks so much for joining us on Al Jazeera. Great to get your perspective.
Thank you.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news, expert insight. Like, share, stay ahead.